some very familiar names as we pitch Coopers, Brabhams and Lotuses against the foreign opposition. Let's take a look at the grid for our pre-66 Grand Prix car race, and we have Coopers right at the front and centre. Will Nuttall, Michael Gans, Rudiger Friedrichs, Charlie Martin, Justin Mears. 5 Coopers in the top 5 ahead of Andy Middlehurst in the first of the Lotuses, the Lotus 25. Tim Child, the best of the Brabhams. A couple of older Lotus 18s up behind them. You can see BRM's front-engine Scarabs and the front-engine Curtis as well as some other front-engine cars, the Tecmec Maserati and 250F. And this marks the changing of the guard when the last of the front-engine Grand Prix cars were finally superseded by their rear-engined rivals, which still rule the race to this day. So this is really a great opportunity to see the very last of the front-engine cars in action, and the cars that drove the revolution on with the engine behind the driver. Welcome back to Silverstone, everybody. Martin Haven, Alistair Douglas are ready to call the action. Well, we've just seen Ground Effect 1982 cars in action, and those were definitely derived from the Coopers, the Brabhams and so on, who led the rear-engine revolution in Formula One in the late 1950s and early 60s. And it is those low-slung rear-engine cars that dominate here. You'll see the front-engine cars very easily, predominantly they are much taller with a much longer nose and the driver right up by the back axle. They're not as dynamically efficient, they're not as aerodynamically efficient, and even by 1960 Ferrari realised the writing was on the wall. There's one 246 Dino Ferrari front-engine Formula One car in the field, but after that all Ferraris went to mid-engine, at least for Grand Prix racing. We are getting ready to go with our fabulous field of cars eager to be unleashed around this Silverstone Grand Prix circuit. Cars coming to the line for the pre-66 Grand Prix race, and it is a sea of green at the front as the rear-engine Coopers and Lotuses dominate proceedings as they did in period. Will Nuttall from pole from Michael Gans on the outside. Gans sweeping around the outside in a later Cooper T79, the T53 on pole position. But all of these tiny little jewels of Grand Prix cars, not that much different from the Formula Juniors that started our day here at Silverstone, and we're going to have to take a corner or two to sort all this out. On the grid, Rudiger Friedrichs, Charlie Martin ahead of Justin Mears, all Coopers in the top 5, and the first green and yellow-wheeled Lotus was the car of Andy Middlehurst in 6th, but it looks like he made a little bit of a cautious start, Alistair Douglas.
Yes, I think once again Rudy Friedrichs got a great start. That's him in 3rd place, number 12 on your left-hand side of your screen. But taking the lead back, going into Brooklands, Will Nuttall from pole position, but Michael Gans in the white Cooper T79, a later car, made a much better start. And you can see the difference, can't you? The Cooper of Will Nuttall in the lead with a sort of high back over the engine, but by the time we got to the T79 it was much lower, much more cigar tube shaped as they come down along the old pit straight towards Copse Corner. What a great shot there as Michael Gans goes to the inside trying to get past Will Nuttall and slides through on the inside at Copse Corner, but Will is holding on. He's trying to take the wide line up towards Maggots, but who has got the lead going in through Maggots? Well, it's Michael Gans in the Cooper T79 who leads into Beckett's for the first time. Will Nuttall sliding through the first element of Beckett's, the second element. He'll now try and stay behind Michael Gans very closely so that he can get a good run down the hanger straight into Stowe Corner. So there's Gans leading, there's Will Nuttall in 2nd place, and just behind them Rudiger Friedrichs in another Cooper, another of the T53s, in 3rd place.
Yeah, you can see 4 years, 4 seasons of development between the kind of Cooper with which Jack Brabham won his World Championship for Charlie Cooper, car number 10 there, the pole sitter Will Nuttall, and again the more traditional cigar-shaped car of Michael Gans. By the stage of the T79 and Michael Gans arriving, Cooper was almost on the ropes in terms of being a front-running Formula One car manufacturer, but without Charlie Cooper's drive and determination and ability to make a pound go further than many, the rear engine revolution might have been a few more years in coming. The Coopers sold in fairly decent numbers, and as a result lots of them on the grid. As you said, Rudiger Friedrichs, who made an electrifying start yesterday, starting strongly from third on the grid. He's going with the leaders, and the more they battle, the more chance he has of staying with them. This is going to be a short, sharp event. Didn't come out the way nature intended. Michael Gans with Will Nuttall having to take 2 wheels at least onto the grass there to avoid contact. Gans trying to cut him off as they come down onto the Wellington Straight, and Will Nuttall having to go the long way around the outside. Lots more action behind. Can see coming down the inside the green and yellow Lotus of Andy Middlehurst, trying to get by the Brabham of Tim Child. That's a battle, I think, for 5th place. And did Middlehurst get through? No, they're still side by side. The red Brabham on the inside at Luffield behind these leaders. So let's watch the leaders go through. And here comes the battle now for 5th position. There is the red car of Child and the green car with the yellow wheels. That's Middlehurst, an ex-Jim Clark, one of 2 ex-Jim Clark Lotus chassis, I think, in the field. The Lotus 25. Again, those classic cigar tube shapes and the beetle back of the early rear-engine Coopers, and showing the early Coopers there exactly where they came from. It looks like a Cooper 500. It's just got a slightly different rear end to it. It looks like what it was derived from, and 3 or 4 years later then the classic look there of the later Coopers and the Lotus really became a much more aerodynamic prospect.
A great battle going on, as you say, for 4th, 5th and 6th places, with Chris Middlehurst in the, as you quite rightly said, one of the 2 ex-Jim Clark cars. This one actually took Jim Clark to 7 wins in 1963, and they only had 10 races then. It's not like today. So 7 out of 10 races won by that car, and it's great to see that Andy Middlehurst wears a similar coloured helmet and style, with would have been a white peak for Jim Clark, but he uses a white band across the top of the full face helmet and that dark blue colour. So Andy Middlehurst in the Lotus 25, number 25, chasing after the Brabham BT3/4 of Tim Child, who in turn is trying to get past the Cooper just ahead, which is Justin Mayers, as they come through the left-hander and into the right-hander. Tight right here at Village. Tim Child, a little bit of a lock-up there. That's an opportunity for Andy Middlehurst, but can't get through there. And one of the things about that Lotus 25, even compared to Tim Child's car, which went very wide, is how low it is to the ground, isn't it? Compared especially to Justin Mayer's Cooper T53. Look at that, perfect. You can see how much lower the helmet of Andy Middlehurst is.
Yeah, you could barely see Middlehurst's car behind the T53 Cooper. Middlehurst up the inside and just making sure there's enough room for both of them to survive. And this is really important with these cars. All these guys are racing for fun, not for money, not to become world champion. So they are giving each other room, because they all know, like motorcycle racers do, if you tangle wheels, then you're just as likely to get hurt as the other guy, and nobody wants that. Nobody wants to damage the cars, but most importantly there is self-preservation. But again, this battle continues to rage on behind the 4th place Cooper and the red and green car, the BT34 Brabham and Tim Child, just holding on in front of Andy Middlehurst in the green Lotus with the yellow wobbly wheels. And if you want to know why they're called wobbly, they had a sort of convoluted effect for strength. And again, the Brabham goes off. It looks like he's not quite got the measure of the grip of this car yet. Tim Child comes back on, having taken the more straightforward route around Beckett's. In fact, the route that would have been taken in the 60s around Beckett's before the Beckett's S's existed. So he comes back on in front of the Cooper.
I suspect he'll have to let them through, otherwise he'll get a penalty. He doesn't see, he would have done it on the hanger straight, I would have thought, but anyway, that's up to Tim Child. But no doubt he took an advantage by running off track there.
He will need to give that spot back to Justin Mayers, won't he? But he might take his fine time in doing it. Andy Middlehurst being caught from behind now. And so coming up behind him is the Lotus AT. Now that's the pale green car, and a more square looking car, slab sided, more square opening to the nose. That's Andrew Beaumont's car number 49, and the colours of the car, the UDT Laystall. Now that was a finance company that got involved in sponsoring cars in the very early 1960s, so that's that pale green. There's another team that ran pale green colours, BRP, the British Racing Partnership team, but that is UDT Laystall colours. Well, Middlehurst had a little stab to get through, and Chester Mayer's coming back at him there, but decided against really trying to push the issue. Middlehurst head down and charging. And by the way, just a little note on the Jim Clark helmet colours. Why was it blue with the white peak? Well, because he was a proud Scot, and those are the colours of the Scottish flag, the saltire. So he had Scottish blue and white on his helmet. And as you said, Andy Middlehurst just keeping that sort of resemblance alive, let's say. And actually, the smooth lines that Andy Middlehurst uses, I think would very much meet the approval of Jim Clark and Colin Chapman, the car's designer.
And although not relevant to this period of racing, Andrew Beaumont, we mentioned there in the pale green Lotus, just behind here, for those fans of helmet colours, that's Ronnie Peterson, isn't it? Blue helmet with the yellow peak, usually with Vicks written across the front, and Andrew Beaumont always wears that Ronnie Peterson tribute helmet, but of course Ronnie would not have driven, well, he may have driven them for fun, but these cars were well past when Ronnie came into Formula One. Yeah,
he was still at school in short trousers. And Andrew Beaumont, by the way, has another Lotus 18, number 18, Clinton McCarthy, right behind him, darker green. But back with the leaders, and Will Nuttall ahead of Michael Gann. So that battle, at least for the moment, is sort of resigned itself to Nuttall in front of Gans. Rudiger Friedrichs on his own in third, and the gap is growing back to this battle for fourth place. Tim Child in the red, sort of orangey red with green striped Brabham BT34, just ahead of the classic Lotus colours of Andy Middlehurst. It's not British racing green. The darker green, perhaps on the Coopers, was more a British racing green. But Chapman adopted that green with bright yellow, easily distinguishable, and that coated so many of his cars until commercial sponsorship really came along, and then the colours all changed, first to red and white, and then to black and gold, and on and on. But the classic Team Lotus colours, and of course Colin Chapman's son Clive Chapman runs classic Team Lotus, who service and provide parts and support for so many of the X-Works racers of all different vintages. And Middlehurst giving a very good account of himself. Look how similar the two cars look, not too much to distinguish the shape. Until aerodynamic wings came along, it was basically as small a tube as you could create to enclose the driver, the radiators and the engine. And of course in the 1.5 litre Formula One, before the return to power, the cars were absolutely tiny.
That's the Assegai, I think, isn't it? Yes, Julian Ellison in the unique car from South Africa, the Assegai. And unfortunately that's a retirement on the inside of Woodcote Corner.
We got a little further in yesterday's race, but that is the end of the race again. Unfortunately, he doesn't finish either of these. The straps on the arms, by the way, those are to stop the driver's arms flailing around in the case of a rollover. Alfa Romeo badge on the back of the car. I have to say, I'm not sure what engine the Assegai has in it. Does it have a 1500 Alfa motor?
That was what it was originally built with, yes.
There you go.
Alfa Romeo derived is how it's described, and the builder of the name of the builder of the car and who drove it as well, Tony Coates, on the side of the car. Never raced in championship race though. And you're talking about the development of these cars. The Brabham here, Tim Child's car, 1962, and the Lotus behind, Jim Clark's car from 1963. So you can see how much lower Colin Chapman managed to make that car. But the red Brabham was actually a development car, and that's why it's 3/4, because Brabham was using Jack Brabham driving the BT3, but developed the BT4, and that was a car that was kind of halfway between the two that he used in the Tasman series down south.
And the Brabham, that doesn't mean the south coast of England, that means Australia, New Zealand. The Brabham link, of course, very much alive with Cooper. In a Cooper like this, Jack Brabham won his first World Championship. And then, I can't imagine too many stronger-willed individuals than Charlie Cooper and Jack Brabham at that period, and I think Brabham, whether it was always his intention or not, decided to go and plough his own furrow and became just as successful, and in the end the Brabham team overshadowed and outlived Cooper as a Formula One name. But further back in the field we've got predecessors to this. Cooper was not always rear-engined in Grand Prix or in single-seater racing. We've got the very upright Cooper Bristol, car number 21, dark green car of Ian Nuttall, which looks about 3 times the height of these cars. You'll see him further back down the field. Cooper Bristol, the sort of car with which a man who was to become world champion, Mike Hawthorne, really started to make his name. They raced in Formula 2 and quite often actually in Grand Prix races or Formula 1 races to make up the grid. And as you said, Jim Clark's car that's being driven by Andy Middlehurst, car number 10, car number 25. There were 10 championship races in the 1963 season. There were probably nearly as many non-championship races. There would have been a non-championship Formula 1 race at Silverstone, there would have been one at Brands Hatch, there would have been one, likely as not, at Donington Park as well, and quite conceivably a number across Europe, France, Germany, Italy. Non-championship races were almost as common as championship races in those days, and so you would be paid start money. Often you pay a lot of money to get Ferraris on the grid. You tended to then have to pay a bit more money to get a Sterling Moss, a Fangio or a Jim Clark to appear. But that's how promoters managed to fill out the grids of their non-championship races. Well, oh, big moment there for one of our front-engine cars.
That was the leading front-engine car.
That was the leading front-engine car.
And that's the Maserati Tech-Mech of Tony Wood, which was very, very clearly, we know what's gone wrong with that. The front suspension has collapsed as he turned in to Beckett's, and Tony Wood managing to get that car to a safe stop. And we cut to that just really to show the leading front engine car, but unfortunately a failure of the car. That was running in 13th place overall.
Yeah, and a real heart in the mouth moment for him, I'm absolutely certain of that. And here turning into Beckett's, and suddenly the lower link goes, and then, well, he did a commendable job to get that slowed. He's going across the curbs, the grass, the gravel and the tarmac, and the engine is basically running on 3 wheels and the steering rack, or the steering rack mounts. So well held, sir. That is a big Code Brown moment there. Did a very good job. The Tech-Mech Maserati, developed from the Maserati 250F, and actually behind the wheels looks very similar to a standard 250F, but an awful lot more going on under the skin to try and keep the front engine cars alive.
That's another driver to add to my list to apologise to for giving him the commentator's curse, because I'd wanted to look at the so here we are back with one of the other ex-Jim Clark cars, the other one that we talked about, the number 29 Nick Fennell car, the next chassis number on from Jim Clark's car, but this one he also drove, and Nick Fennell having a great battle. This is for 8th place with Clinton McCarthy in car number 18. You briefly mentioned that, a Lotus 18 with the number 18, and that one was again driven by Jim Clark. It was actually his first single-seater win at Brands Hatch in 1960 in the car number 18, but we're back with our lead battle.
Yeah, we are. Clinton McCarthy was all over the back of the pale green Lotus 18 of Andrew Beaumont the last time we saw them. He has dropped back into the clutches of that Lotus 25 of Nick Fennell. Meanwhile, Michael Gans has decided that as we're getting down to the last couple of laps, he is not going to sit back and relax, and is now pressuring Will Nuttall. I doubt Michael Gans has been able to stay so close to Will Nuttall by sitting back and relaxing, by the way, but occasionally attack does not work well. They're coming up behind. There you go, there's a Cooper Bristol with a yellow noseband, and look at the size of the car. Yes, it's a 2-litre Cooper engine, but it's a 2-litre Bristol engine, but it's a very much taller engine. The engine in front of the driver means the driver has to sit up a long way as well. That the driver's hips are probably higher than the heads of the drivers in the single-seaters. There are 2 Cooper Bristols running nose to tail, or very nearly nose to tail, as the leaders come through, trailing smoke from that unladen left front. Will Nuttall, big moment for him into Brooklands. He manages to get through without losing too much ground. Michael Gans having to go the long way around the outside at Luffield, now cuts back, and that really cost Michael Gans. That actually may have cost him the race. Unintentional. The driver in front doing what he could, staying on the racing line, which is always the advice for a driver when a quicker car comes up behind. But Michael Gans couldn't get around the outside, caught the car going into Luffield, couldn't get around the inside either. Really needed to find a bit more pace, and that half-second gap is now opened up probably to at least a full second. So Michael Gans with a lot of work to do. There'll be 1 lap to go as they get to the wing this time.
And a lovely shot there of Michael Gans just having to wind on a little bit of opposite lock as he came through the last element of Beckett's, but all very much under control. But he can see the lead car of Will Nuttall a lot further ahead than he was just a lap or so back as they pass the absolutely beautiful Tony Smith Ferrari 246 Dino, the type of car that took the very last front-engined win post-war for Phil Hill at Monza in 1960 was that type of car, and it then went rear or mid-engine, whichever way you like to look at it, engine behind the driver anyway, and that car in the background, number 4, was the type of car that took that win, as we watch the type of car that actually took over really. And now we're looking at the leading front-engined car, and this is Andrew Haddon's Scarab with the Offenhauser engine, and very much looks like an Indy car, and that's because that's where its roots were, in America. And sadly, a lovely car, brilliant car, a lovely engine, really nice to drive, but too late. They'd all gone mid-engine, rear engine by then.
Yeah, Ferrari had just enough left in the tank with Phil Hill to win with the front engine car in 1960, but by 1961 the Ferrari Sharknose had arrived, the engine was in the back, and Phil Hill became world champion. And so bringing this car into that arena was always going to be too little too late. And it's not the only front-engine American-derived car either. The Scarab's built in the USA with Offenhauser 4-cylinder engines, but the fabulous maroon car number 77, the Curtis 500, is a proper Indy Roadster from 1954, and that with a 2.5-litre 6-cylinder Offenhauser engine. And the reason it's here is that in that period in the late 50s, the Indy 500 could give you points towards the Formula 1 World Championship. Well, Will Nuttall is away and clear on this final lap. Michael Gans in second. Rudiger Friedrichs is 20 seconds behind them. The gap went out from half a second to 1.8 seconds in traffic on the last lap. Will Nuttall got the break into Luffield and got another good run through another couple of cars early in this final lap, and as a result has been able to distance himself from the chasing Michael Gans. That's a real shame, because I think Gans was definitely trying to figure out a way to attack Nuttall on the final lap to try and claim this victory, but it will be victory at Silverstone in the pre-66 Grand Prix race for the man who started from pole position, Will Nuttall, in the T53 Cooper, the classic Cooper colours, dark green with those twin Cooper stripes that are seen so often on Minis, and it is victory for Will Nuttall. Michael Gans second, from second on the grid, and from third on the grid. This is how they finished yesterday. Rudiger Friedrichs started third in his beautiful pale grey car with the white stripes, and through he come, not pale grey I guess, it's sort of mid-grey car, but a really fetching version of the Cooper livery. He comes through into third place. That's yesterday's podium as it was, and at the line it's Child ahead of Middlehurst by inches, is it? I think it is now. Don't forget, however, that Tim Child ran very wide off about midway through the race and then came back on in front of his rivals at the Beckett's S's and may yet have a little bit to say about that. So he pips Andy Middlehurst to the line. I don't think putting a foot wrong will Nuttall, Michael Gans or Rudiger Friedrichs. Don't think the stewards will be wanting to see them for anything. Checkered flag has been taken by our lead group. And Andy Middlehurst, although he's not on the overall podium, will be a class winner as well. There's half a dozen classes here. Our other class winners, well, we saw him earlier on, car number 30, Andrew Haddon in the Scarab, the leading front engine car. He's taken the flag to win that class. Now, car number 34, which was leading his class, Maserati 250F of John Spears, has actually ended the race in the pit lane, so that will move a little further down the order. But lots and lots of, here's our victorious front engine car, one of the two Scarabs made, one of the two Scarabs in the race here as well, with that heavily canted over four-cylinder Offenhauser engine. You look at an Indy Offie engine and you think, boy, that's really tall, but then you can see the driver is offset to the right, so the prop shaft goes down the driver's left-hand side, and that's where the crank is. The crank is just beside the left front suspension, and the heads are just beside the right front suspension. If they took the bodywork off, the engine, it doesn't look like it's horizontal, but it is laid over at a very, very substantial angle. So that's how they managed to get the cars lower and lower to try and match the small frontal area of these front engine cars. Well, there is your winner, Will Nuttall, doubly victorious in this car here at Silverstone this weekend. So it's been a great classic for him in these pre-66 Grand Prix cars. We started the morning, Alistair Douglas, with the stepping stone for Formula One, the Formula Juniors, and we talked about the fact that they were just a sort of an engine change away from being Grand Prix cars, and the early Coopers here are exactly that. They're 1.5 litre versions of what would effectively otherwise have been, or could easily have been, a Formula Junior car.
Yes, and some of the chassis types, the Lotus 18, for example, there were Lotus 18s in the Formula Junior race this morning, so absolutely they were interchangeable, and that was partly due to the manufacturers wanting to sell more cars. They could manufacture a car which could take various different engines, and they also took the bigger 2.5 litre engine as well when they went down to the, what I call down south, that's the Tasman series, which was a way of professional Grand Prix drivers earning some more money. They weren't paid lots and lots of money then, and they had to work as long as they could, and going into the warmer climes of New Zealand and Australia in the winter for their winter series called the Tasman series was a way of earning an extra penny or two.
And a way of earning some revenue for the car owners and manufacturers as well, because very frequently they would go on a boat to the Tasman series and get bought by the locals and never return. Will Nuttall, the winner in the T52 Cooper, ahead of Michael Gans in the later Type 79, and Rudiger Friedrichs in his T53, rounding out the podium. They're the same top three as yesterday. Tim Child, well, he finished ahead of Andy Middlehurst on the road. Will he keep the position? Only the stewards know. Andrew Beaumont, the leading Lotus 18. Clinton McCarthy fell behind Justin Mears, ahead of Nick Fennell, hang on in front of the Lotus 25. And Philip Buhoffer taking his BRM P261 into the top 10. Just behind him was our leading front engine car, the Scarab of Andrew Haddon, knocking on the door of the top 10 overall. So they may have been outdated, but they were still pretty quick and reliable. The Curtis of Geraint Owen. Why are you driving an Indy Roadster? Because it's fun and it does great skids, he said in the collecting area on Saturday. I don't suppose his opinion of that will have changed one iota in the intervening 24 hours. Well, there you go. That is how they finished, or failed to finish, in our pre-66 Grand Prix race. The change from front engine to rear engined was a seismic one for Formula One teams, and our pre-66 Grand Prix race encapsulated exactly that, with the old dinosaurs with the cart behind the horse, struggling to hold off the new kids with the engine behind the driver. It was a battle between the dominant forces at the time, Cooper, Brabham and Lotus. Tech-Mech Maserati having a mechanical failure, but it was not on the front running pace anyway. And the podium in race 2, the same as it had been for race 1. Will Nuttall taking victory from Michael Gans and Rudiger Friedrichs, all of them in Coopers, where the Scarab again came out on top in the front engine class.